Good morning, everyone. So I'm Sam Minden, and as you can see, my talk is going to be on the Roman barbarians and the barbaric Romans, the Ostrogothic kingdom of Italy, and the slow disappearance of Roman power in the West. When the idea of the fall of the Roman Empire has been traditionally discussed, but past historians have conjured up this image of wild hordes of rampaging barbarians destroying the pristine cities of the greatest empire in the world in history. In actuality, the story of the disappearance of Rome is far more complex and tragic than this simplistic narrative. Following the deposition of the last Roman emperor by Odovacar, Italy fell under the rule of the Ostrogoths led by Theodoric the Great, who, in their own unique manner, attempted to maintain the idea of a Roman West both politically and provincially. Upon their initial arrival in Italy, the Ostrogoths appeared as an invited invasion that had been sent by Constantinople to deal with the disturbance in the West, a role not unfamiliar to many barbarian tribes during late antiquity. However, once in control, Theodoric and the Ostrogoths took great interest in presenting themselves as part of the continuity of Roman imperial rule through their actions and appearances, enacting laws and overseeing vast building projects for the benefit of the people and the state. Moreover, the campaigns of Theodoric and the writings of his chief scholar Cassiodorus provide evidence of Roman notions of hegemony and empire surviving under Ostrogothic rule. Contemporaneously, the Ostrogoths began to move away from and phase out the old Roman bureaucracy in favor of a smaller, more personal court of advisors. On a provincial level, the Ostrogoths' maintenance and support of the old Roman infrastructure allowed for life to carry on largely as it had. Eventually, the Ostrogoths' presumption of their place in society and the superiority of their values led to them segregating and pigeonholing Roman society, casting the Romans as subservient to the Goths. Through the writings of the philosopher and politician Boethius, one can see glimpses of this alleged corruption and of the exploitation of the common people by the Ostrogoths and their allies. Ultimately, it was the Ostrogoths' prolonged and bloody war with the armies of the Emperor Justinian that would destroy what remained of Rome's presence in the West. As such, during the long decline of the Western Roman Empire, the Ostrogoths took on many of the old Roman systems of governance in its institutions and in its relation with its subjects in their previously Roman system, while simultaneously striving to maintain and spread their Gothic identity and traditions. In the end, it was the mutually destructive actions of the Ostrogoths and the Romans during Justinian's wars of reconquest, rather than in the initial Ostrogothic invasions, that resulted in irreversible damage to the Roman presence in the West, both politically and provincially. Prior to their conquest of Italy, the primary interactions between the Ostrogoths and the Western Roman Empire was in a military sense, both fighting against the Romans as allies of the Huns, and serving alongside the Romans as foederati soldiers. In this way, the Ostrogothic relation with Rome was not dissimilar from Rome's relation with other prominent barbarian groups that they encountered in the 4th and 5th centuries, against whom they fought on the frontier and employed to bolster their defenses. Historian Brian Ward Perkins characterizes the simultaneously hostile and accommodating approach to dealing with the barbarians as a significant factor contributing to the gradual disintegration of the Western Roman Empire. Rome's tendency to hand over sections of their land to barbarian tribes in exchange for military support and a promise of non-inquiry. Rome, while this policy was sometimes effective, it often resulted in these new barbarian rulers breaking away from Rome to create their own kingdoms. Such was the case with the Visigoths in Aquitaine in Spain, whom the Romans had given those lands to in exchange for stopping their constant fighting, and whom the Visigoths immediately took and turned into their own kingdom. In the case of the Ostrogoths, this policy is most prominently on display in Rome's decision to hand over the strategically and militarily important region of Pannonia to them in 457 CE as a means to bring an end to a dispute between the Western and Eastern Roman empires over this region. Once settled, the Ostrogoths frequently clashed with the Eastern Roman Empire over recognition and resources, but do appear to have provided soldiers for the armies of the Western Roman Empire, implying a less hostile relationship. All this would change in 488 CE, when the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno permitted King Theodoric of the Ostrogoths to invade and resettle in Italy in exchange for overthrowing the barbarian usurper Odoacer. As noted by Paul Barnwell, this decision is also largely in keeping with another major theme in late antique Romano-barbarian diplomacy, that of pitting different tribes and leaders against one another as a means to both reclaim lost territory and to weaken the potential rivals without the loss of Roman life. As a result, the initial interaction between the Western Roman Empire and the Ostrogoths can be considered part of this broader history of Rome's complex and often self-destructive relationship with the barbarian tribes immigrating to their lands. Following their conquest of Italy, the Ostrogoths of Theodoric sought to present themselves as the inheritors and preservers of the old Western Roman Empire, while simultaneously altering the conceptions and practices of power and administration in the territory. Throughout his rule of Italy, Theodoric and his court relied on the ideology, institution, and iconography of Rome to maintain their power and bring peace and order to Italy. According to historian Jonathan Arnold, this interest in the preservation of Roman society was a result of the fact that the Ostrogoths saw themselves as the legitimate representatives of imperial power in the West. One method by which Theodoric presented himself as part of the Roman tradition was through his self-presentation on coins and in public art, where he depicted himself wearing the traditional purple garbs and diadem of the Roman emperor, labeling himself with the title of princeps. This strategic presentation is a clear evocation of the Roman emperors of old, whom Theodoric wished to emulate in his rule. Theodoric and the Ostrogoths also used the Roman legal system as a means to justify their rule and to maintain their new Roman identity. In its description of Theodoric's entry into Rome, the chronicle, the Anonymous Valentianus, describes that Theodoric, at the request of the people, gave orders that the words of the promise he had made to them be inscribed upon a bronze tablet and set up in a public place. In this passage, Theodoric is presented as a just and honest lawgiver with a strong respect for the Roman people, for the people of Rome, and an interest in supporting their prosperity. Moreover, by emphasizing his communication with the common people, Theodoric sought to re-emphasize the Roman notions of political freedom and a politically active citizenry. Theodoric also sought to revive the old Roman tradition of pragmatic religious tolerance. When asked by the Jewish communities of Genoa and Rome for justice and protection against anti-Semitic attacks led by the Christian majority, Theodoric agreed on the conditions that the Jews followed the law and remained loyal subjects to him. A likely reason for this more tolerant approach was that Theodoric, as an Arian Christian, was himself part of a religious minority in Italy and thus wished to maintain peace and relative harmony between the different religions and sects of his empire. This personally motivated philosophy serves as a contrast to the growing trends towards government-sanctioned persecution and religious homogeneity that were rising in the rest of the Roman world. Through his calculated use of laws and imperial iconography, especially in his artful rebranding of the title of princeps, Theodoric linked himself directly to Rome's golden age and its ideals. Such an appeal to Roman law and tradition appears to have worked in Theodoric's favor, as even the prominent Byzantine historian Procopius begrudgingly notes that he was truly an emperor, as any who have distinguished themselves in this office from the beginning, and love for him amongst both Goths and Romans grew to be great. Theodoric further kept the spirit of Rome alive through his attempts to revive the homogeny of the empire in the Western Mediterranean. Over the course of his reign, Theodoric launched numerous military and diplomatic expeditions to expand the control and influence of his kingdom, and by extension, the influence of Rome. Through a combination of diplomacy and political marriages, the Ostrogoths gained control of the Visigoth-ruled Spain, whereupon they began to impose their own Romano-Gothic administration over their new subjects. In particular, Thomas Burns notes that a major administrative decision carried out by the Ostrogoths in Spain was to revise their system of weights and measurements in order to allow for more equitable trade and tribute. Even in their relationship with the neighboring kingdoms that Theodoric did not conquer, one is able to see evidence of the Ostrogoths using the threat of Roman military power to maintain peace. In a letter to a coalition of Germano-Gallic kings, Theodoric orders them to represent Ostrogothic interests in Gaul, stating, "Tell him," him being King Clovis of the Franks, "to halt the war with the Visigoths out of regard for justice and to have recourse to the law of nations. Otherwise, he will suffer the invasion of all for holding the judgment of so many in contempt. In this passage, Theodoric used rhetorical appeals to military force and justice to portray himself as the de facto hegemon of the Western Mediterranean world. In this, Theodoric and the Ostrogoths were effectively mimicking and recreating Roman imperial power in the region, albeit under non-Roman rulers. In spite of Theodoric's attempts to present himself as the inheritor and preserver of the Western Roman Empire, during his rule there was a gradual shift away from the traditionally Roman interpretations of authority and administration to ones that were more markedly Germanic. While the Ostrogoths made many use of Roman titles and administrative positions in their rule of Italy, the old Roman bureaucracy had largely vanished in favor of power being centered in the hands of the king and his courtiers. This is reflective of a larger shift within the post-Roman world, where an administrative power was now in the hands of military officers chosen for their individual loyalty to the ruler rather than civil servants. Likewise, by placing power in the hands of royally appointed courtiers and generals, the Ostrogoths effectively removed the old Roman-style civil service-based aristocracy and the senatorial class from any meaningful power. It should also be noted that this shift to a court-based system of rule in place of a senatorial rule had already begun during the late Roman Empire and was merely being continued by Theodoric and the Ostrogoths. By concentrating more power around the king and the court, offices of power that had carried numerous benefits and freedoms began to lose their privileges as they became more accountable to the active monarch. It is important to note that although Theodoric and his successors presented themselves as Roman-style emperors and used the title princeps, they never claimed the specific title of emperor, and were always referred to as Rex Gothorum, King of the Goths. By avoiding the imperial title and opting for the lesser title of king, the Goths more closely aligned themselves with the new polities and kingdoms being created by their fellow Germanic migrants in the old Roman Empire. The Ostrogoths also sought to show their differences in superiority over the Roman Empire through their written history. Cassiodorus' now lost work on the history of the Goths, for example, claimed a 2,000-year-old history for the Gothic people, compared to Rome's mere 1,000-year-long history. By making this boastful claim, the Ostrogoths sought to present themselves as a civilization of greater authority and antiquity than even the Romans. Even though those of the Ostrogothic kingdom did seek to present themselves as the inheritors of Rome, they were equally interested in supplanting Rome as the leading hegemonic power in the Western Mediterranean world. On a provincial level, the Ostrogoths' relationship with the people of Italy was more complex, as they simultaneously encouraged life to continue on as normal, while also prioritizing their own needs over those of their new subjects. The anonymous Valentianus recounts that one of the successes of Theodoric's early reign was his encouragement of all the people of his empire that they could carry on their business at whatever hour they chose, as if it were daylight. This supportive attitude towards the daily life of the Romans is further reinforced in a letter from Cassiodorus' Variae, wherein Theodoric not only gives orders for building new infrastructure and repairing the old, but also informs his officers that they must collect the designated quantities of provisions without plundering the peasants. By stressing the importance of respecting the rights and safety of their Italian subjects, as well as maintaining the infrastructure that supported their livelihoods, the Ostrogoths under Theodoric endeared themselves to the people of Italy. In addition, the Ostrogoths' reliance on the old Roman laws as the basis for their government gave the people in Italy a sense that little had changed under their new rulers, and that they could be protected by familiar laws, as opposed to being oppressed by foreign ones. The Ostrogoths' sought work to present themselves as a continuation of Roman rule for the common people is further seen in their patronage of traditional forms of Roman entertainment, as the anonymous Valentianus observes that during his visit to Rome, Theodoric exhibited games in the circus for the Romans. In addition to their support of Roman laws and infrastructure, the Ostrogoths' continuation and patronage of daily entertainment enjoyed by the masses helped to give the confidence to the Italian people that they were still under the protection of a Roman emperor. This provincial sense of unity and Roman continuity can even be seen in this twilight of the Ostrogothic rule of Italy at the Byzantine general Belisarius' siege of Neapolis, where Jews, Goths, and Italians fought side by side to the last in defense of their shared home. For all their symbolic support of Roman culture and law, the Ostrogoths' interaction with Rome at a local level ushered in many broad changes within Roman society. While the Ostrogoths were generally benevolent to their new subjects, they were also more willing to force established Roman families and farmers from their land to make way for new Gothic settlers. The sense of displacement from their homeland experienced by some Romans is echoed in Boethius' The Consolation of Philosophy. Early in the text, Boethius, a former advisor in Theodoric's court who had been condemned to death for treason, rails against the injustices inflicted upon the common people of Italy. He states, "When provincials lost their wealth due through looting or through taxation by the state, my grief was no less than that of the victims." Though again, it should be noted that Boethius had been part of the same administration that was doing this sort of thing and had held the highest offices in Theodoric's court before he had been arrested. To Boethius, the rule of the Ostrogoths was a time of oppression for the masses and an era of degradation of all things truly Roman, comparing the tyranny of the Goths to that of Caligula. One might find this image of oppression incongruous with the laudatory praises heaped onto the rule of Theodoric by the anonymous Valentianus, but this can be justified by the fact that the anonymous Valentianus appears to be more focused on the Ostrogoths' interactions with the Romans in major urban centers such as Rome, Ravenna, and Verona, while all the cases provided by Boethius in his criticism of Theodoric and the Ostrogoths are related to their treatment of the rural communities. Moreover, it should be noted that Boethius' circumstances at the time of writing the Consolations, it is unlikely he would have held a positive view of the man who had condemned him to death. This, however, does display a disconnect between the Ostrogoths' relation with the Italians of the city and the Italians of the country, in that they presented themselves as benevolent Romanesque benefactors in the cities, while simultaneously seizing the countryside for their own people. One possible explanation for this difference in treatment is that the Ostrogoths had more interest in the Italian countryside than the cities as a location for the settlement of their people, in particular their soldiers, as a means of permanently entrenching themselves in Italy and attaining direct control over its resources. In addition, the Ostrogoths relied on the goodwill and the support of the Italian cities as a source of revenue for their various endeavors, and as such would not wish to lose this vital font of wealth. The notion of displacement found in Romano-Ostrogothic relations can also be seen in the Ostrogoths' dismantling and rearranging of one of Rome's proudest traditions, its army. For much of Roman history, the army and military service was a symbol of Roman dominance and civilization. However, through the 4th and 5th century, the army had been in a severe state of decline due to the economically crippling costs needed to fund and sustain it. With the Ostrogoths' conquest of Italy, the new rulers appropriated these traditions for their own people, while simultaneously excluding the Romans from them. As noted by Thomas S. Burns, a key success of the Ostrogoths was their ability to mimic and recreate the old Roman army and its traditions, while ensuring that it was comprised almost entirely of Goths. A result of this was a general discouragement of native Italians from enlisting in the army, and the Ostrogoths' establishment of a social binary in which the Goths were the warriors and defenders of the kingdoms, and the Italians were to support them from afar. This is not to say that Italians and non-Ostrogoths were banned from joining the army or being conscripted, but by and large, the idea of military service had been entrenched as a core feature of Gothic identity rather than that of Rome. The Gothic displacement of Roman military values and the segregation of local Italians into a civilian role is largely articulated in Procopius' account of the succession crisis following Theodoric's death, wherein the Gothic aristocracy protests to Theodoric's daughter, Amalasuntha for trying to raise her son in a Roman fashion. In this dramatic encounter, the nobles argue that a Roman education would be disastrous for the boy and the whole Ostrogothic people, because such an education would be far removed from manliness, and the teachings of old men result, for the most part, in cowardly and submissive spirit. By equating Roman virtues and education with cowardice, the Ostrogoths were able to justify the exclusion of Romans from their army, and in doing so, effectively brought an end to the long history of Roman military might in the West. Ultimately, the greatest damage to Rome's presence in the West was a result of the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian's attempt to liberate Rome's old territory and the decades of horrific war that ensued. The wars over the supremacy of Italy not only resulted in the destruction of land and infrastructure, but also in the concept of a unified Italy and a unified Western Roman Empire. A major recurring theme throughout the Byzantine Gothic wars was the willingness of both armies to destroy fundamental infrastructure as a means to gain short-term successes at the cost of long-term stability. This is best seen on the Byzantine side of the conflict during the siege of Neapolis, where the General Belisarius ordered the destruction of the city's aqueduct with the goal of depriving the city of its populace of fresh water. The Ostrogoths would later do the same to him during their assault on Rome. Historian Herwin Wolfram observes that this destruction of the aqueducts, in particular the ones in Rome, profoundly influenced the future of water supply in Rome and thus the future of the Eternal City. Such actions were devastating in the long run, even if they offered short-term results in battle, as they deprived city dwellers of an accessible source to clean water that they needed to survive, and also made the cities exceptionally more difficult to defend. In addition, driven more by a desire to prove their strength, the Ostrogoths began to tear down city walls as punishment to cities that had defected to the Byzantines, leaving the citizens defenseless. Actions such as these, in addition to the horrific massacres perpetrated by both sides of the conflict, resulted in the populace of Italy being left defenseless and devastated, as well as susceptible to looming threats such as the plague. According to Thomas Burns, one of the lasting results of the desperate actions taken by the Ostrogoths and the Byzantines in order to secure money, provisions, and soldiers for their armies was the complete dismemberment of the old Roman system of taxation and the emergence of localized private wealth. The wars also destroyed any semblance of central authority and unity in Italy, with power fragmenting into the hands of local church authorities and independent regional aristocrats. This created a general sense of destruction and the end of an age, which is reflected in the now cloistered Cassiodorus' An Introduction to Divine and Human Readings, where he states, "My ardent desire," that being the pursuit of knowledge and education, "could in no way have been fulfilled because of the struggles that seethed and raged excessively in the Italian realm." To Cassiodorus, the devastation of the war had brought to an end the golden age of peace and stability of Theodoric's rule that allowed for freedom of learning and for both freedom and the prosperity of learning. Moreover, it could be argued that Cassiodorus viewed his text as a method by which he could preserve knowledge for future generations, that these ideals would not die and that there would always be a way for people to learn them. The destruction wrought by the Ostrogoths and the Byzantines in their futile struggle over Italy also destroyed the notion of a Western imperial power centered on the authority and rule of Italy. Because the Ostrogoths needed to divert troops to Italy to fight Justinian's army, their border territories and allies were left alone and vulnerable to foreign attacks, which occurred when the Franks crossed the Alps and ransacked northern Italy. This led to the people in and around the Ostrogoths territories looking to small-scale strongmen and their militias to defend them, rather than relying on the central government for support. Likewise, vassal territories such as Visigothic Spain took advantage of the chaos to break free from Ostrogothic hegemony and re-establish their own kingdoms. Even after the Byzantines' Pyrrhic victory over the Ostrogoths, they were unable to properly re-establish anything resembling the old Roman Empire in the West due to the destabilization and destruction caused by the war they started, and were forced to localize their power around individual cities such as Ravenna. Justinian only made the situation worse when he and his generals invited the Lombards into Italy, which resulted in them immediately turning on the Byzantines and starting a new war that brought further destruction to Italy. In this manner, the attempted realization of Justinian's dream of recreating and reviving the Western Roman Empire, which had nearly been achieved already by the Ostrogoths, only led to further fragmentation and destabilization in the West. By looking at the Ostrogoths' interaction with the Western Roman Empire and their attempt to imitate it, it is evident that the fall of Rome in the West was a far more complex and drawn-out affair than is often presented. Although the Ostrogoths began their history as just another barbarian tribe that fought for and against the Romans, upon taking control of Italy, they strove to create a sense of familiarity and continuity with the old Roman Empire for their new subjects. This was accomplished with the Ostrogoths' calculated use of Roman imperial titles, iconography, laws, and imperial traditions that harken back to the long past glory days of Rome. The Ostrogoths also sought to re-establish imperial Roman hegemony in the West through both war and diplomacy, enabling for the ideal of a Western Roman-centered empire to endure. All of this while the Ostrogoths began to alter Roman understandings of governments to fit their own culture, changing ideas of the government from the principles of Roman government to something more Germanic. On a provincial level, the Ostrogoth rulers gave their Italian subjects a sense of stability and continuity through their preservation and support of Roman infrastructure, public works, laws, and entertainment. On the other hand, the Ostrogoths effectively destroyed the Roman army as an institution by discouraging Italians from the new Gothic-led army and effectively eliminating the old Roman ideals of martial glory. Ultimately, it would be the vicious war between the Ostrogoths and the Eastern Roman Empire over the control of Italy that would cause the destruction of the idea of the Roman hegemony in the West. Although both sides saw themselves as the defender of Rome's legacy, their devastating actions in the war destroyed any semblance of Roman society left in Italy on both a local and imperial level. When examining the Ostrogoths, it is important to ask, were their actions and laws during the rule of Italy a continuation of Roman tradition, or was it the sign of a polity being built on the wreckage of the past? As such, although the Ostrogoths spent much of their rule of Italy struggling to preserve and revive Roman power in the West, their mutually destructive war with the Eastern Roman Empire can be seen as the true cause of the death of the Roman Empire as a provincial and ideological entity in the West. Thank you very much.
We have a bit of time if anyone has any questions. I want to ask something.
Yeah.
I was interested in the stuff about the selective use of imperial titles. So the way that they were happy to use like a very old term like precepts,
Yeah.
which goes all the way back to Augustus, and then new terms like Rex Corporum. I think you said at one point they didn't explicitly take up the title of emperor.
No, they did not.
So which term is that specifically?
So,
Imperator or Augustus?
I think, yeah, they didn't refer to them. I don't think they referred to themselves as Augustus.
Okay. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
I was also wondering, kind of on the same thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they reinstated or continued to hold circus games. I was wondering if you know if there's any information specifically on the procedures of those games, like whether or not they matched sort of earlier Republican or Imperial style games, or?
Unfortunately, I don't know. The source I was using for the Anonymous Valencianus only says that they held games in the circus. They don't say anything about the games themselves other than they happened and everyone was really happy for them happening.
You mentioned that Theodoric was more religiously tolerant.
Yes, by comparison to Justinian's.
Okay, so this is as opposed to the earlier Christian emperors in the West.
Yes.
So what was the difference in policy, particularly?
So, as mentioned, with the treatment of Jews was much less harsh and than the previous Roman rule and what was going on in the Eastern Roman Empire at the time. And also because Theodoric was from a technically heretical branch of Christianity, he was much more open to endorsing and spreading non-Orthodox views of Christianity as well.
Got it. I was just wondering if it was like, if that's actually reflected in the policy of the other emperors, or if it's just part of the general.
So during Justinian's reign, for example, there were the laws of Justinian did feature laws that were quite oppressive towards the Jews and did try to enforce a notion of total orthodoxy in Christianity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.